Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We'll be starting in a few seconds. Now we're setting everything up and we're live on YouTube and here as well. So I guess we can start. So welcome, everybody, to this webinar, which is part of our ongoing Zero Waste Europe live semester. We have webinars happening once a month from October to June, and we cover different topics related to waste and circular economy. My name is Pierre Fondamin. I work as a waste policy officer at Zero Waste Europe, addressing different policies in Brussels and across Europe related to waste management and waste prevention. For those who do not know our organization, Zero Waste Europe, we are a Brussels-based NGO working on advocacy at the EU level, and we aim to achieve a zero waste society, but we also have a network of organizations implementing zero waste strategy on the ground at the national and the local level across Europe. We are also managing the program called Zero Waste Cities that is dedicated to help cities and communities transitioning towards zero waste. It brings together a platform of knowledge for local stakeholders to implement best practices, but also mentoring and recognition programs for municipalities. And today, the discussion we'll have is very much linked to zero waste strategies happening on the ground and in cities, because we'll be talking about recycling. And as you may know, there has been mandatory binding recycling targets adopted for the EU in 2018. And although the recycling rate is increasing and has been increasing in the past years, we can see that some countries are still below the 2020 target of 50% recycling rate for municipal solid waste. But although there is a progress, we're not meeting the objective of 2020, and generally we tend to see an increasing number of different problems linked to the recycling system in Europe. Because when we look at the recycling system holistically, we can see complex pictures of various policies that are connecting to one another, but also at different levels, be it European, national, or local. And sometimes we see poor performance or a lack of confidence in the system. When talking about those different policies, this ranges from ensuring that recycled content is put back onto the market, but also that this content is free from toxic chemicals. It's also about building effective collection system that deliver not only quantity, but also quality of the recycling inputs. There are also different definitions of what recycling is exactly. And more recently, there has been the growing issue of the export of recyclable waste. And also that is related to the fact that there is still a lot of waste that is incinerated and landfill. So there are a lot of different topics, a lot of different questions around recycling. And through this webinar, we'll try to answer some of the key questions and to deal with all the different policies. And some of the key questions we will address are the following: how can policymakers create a framework that will make packaging safely and effectively recyclable? But also, what is the role of recycling play in a world where we should see reusable as part of waste prevention more and more widespread across Europe? And finally, what could local authorities do in helping and improve our recycling system? We'll have 4 speakers today. The first one will be Emmanuel Katrakis from URIC. Then we'll have Lauren Veer from the Environmental Investigation Agency. Then we'll have Arthur ten Volde from Ecopreneur, and then we'll have Jean-Marc Simon from Zero Waste Europe. The 4 speakers will have approximately 7 to 8 minutes to present. And then after each presentation, we'll have a Q&A session for the specific presentation you've seen. And then at the end of the full presentation, we'll have a 30 minutes Q&A session, and you can ask questions to the 4 speakers. Regarding the tools for this webinar, we have a chat box, so feel free to introduce yourself and to discuss with the other viewers. But if you have questions, I will ask you to submit them via the Q&A box that you should see, I think, right next to the chat box. And then I will make sure to pass them to the speakers during the Q&A session. And as we have a limitation on Zoom, we'll also be live streaming on YouTube. So you can also ask the question via YouTube in the chat. And I think that's it for the technicalities. So I guess we can start with our first speaker. As I said, it's Emmanuel Katrakis, who is Secretary General of the European Recycling Industry Confederation, EURIC, and he has been doing this since 2014. He is responsible for the development of the Confederation that is now representing more than 5,500 companies across Europe dealing with recycling, resource, various type of waste stream, household waste, commercial waste, electronic waste, tires, or even textile. His role is to raise awareness about the role played by recycling in sustainable development, and also to foster policies at the EU level that will improve recycling. Emmanuel is a regular speaker in international conferences dealing with recycling and a member of different expert groups set by European institutions aiming at transitioning towards a circular economy. And he's graduated from in European law from the College of Europe and the University of Paris too, Panthéon-Assas. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Emmanuel. And I can see the screen is shared, so that's perfect.
Thank you very much. I imagine you can hear me and you can also see my screen, right?
Yep, so it's all good.
All good. So first of all, I would like to thank Zero Waste Europe for having me today. Thank you for the extensive presentation as well. It's always a pleasure. And I think the topic and the title, which is, well, a bit provocative, but very interesting, and that is subject to hopefully a lot of constructive discussion. Because if we need actually to improve recycling and I would even say the entire life cycle of product. I'm already giving a hint of what I want to discuss in my presentation, a short one, obviously, and put them into the wider framework of the Green Deal and the New Circular Economy Action Plan. So very, very briefly, we are a confederation. We are representing an industry whose job is basically to turn waste into raw materials, which can be entering a new cycle into different value chains, and which all of them have obviously similarities. When we substitute primary raw materials with raw materials from recycling, we are not only more resource efficient, we also are more climate efficient and energy efficient in most instances. But we also have, depending on the stream at stake, different market failures. So that's why I will also try not only to focus on packaging, but to discuss other streams, or at least give a few hints. So within EURIC, we represent, as it has been mentioned, nearly 6,000 companies. Many of them are SMEs. There is a market consolidation within the recycling industry, but still, the vast majority of companies spread across Europe are small and medium-sized companies. 1 million tons of waste recycled from metal scrap, paper, plastics, be it packaging plastics or technical plastics, paper, tires, end-of-life vehicles, e-waste, textiles, with a lot of preparation for use that the companies we represent are doing, and also battery up to a certain extent. Indeed, when I looked at the title, I wonder where to start, to be frank, because there is not one recycling system. There is different recycling systems, And one of the biggest problems is that sometimes you don't even have a recycling system for some streams. And last but not least, you have huge differences, between member states. And I think when we speak about recycling in Europe, we usually tend to think about household waste management, which is an important part because this is the part that consumers can and citizens can see directly, to which we identify. And we can see, and this is what I also wanted to show in that slide, that first there are huge gaps among member states in terms of performance for collection, treatment, and obviously where waste is going, whether it's going to go for material recovery, recycling, energy recovery, or disposal. And on the other hand, we see that the source, the origin of the waste is extremely diverse. And we have a lot of legislation focusing on household waste or very specific streams like end-of-life vehicle, e-waste, packaging. But there is also a major source of waste from construction, demolition, for instance, which is subject to more discussions. And the other thing I also wanted to mention by saying that is that when we speak about recycling systems, they are inherently different based on what we are going to process, the origin, and obviously what you want to produce, because the challenges behind are completely different. So I also like to be sometimes a bit provocative towards my industry, because if you ask any of the companies that we represent whether waste is a waste or resource, it is a resource. But what is important actually to realize is that the ability to recover the resource depends on very specific factors. I took here very different types of waste, just to show that on one hand, the ability to recover waste is going to depend on the inherent value of the waste. First, if I took a picture of copper, copper is a metal that has a high value. There is no market failure. And you have a market for copper, which is a local, global, and European market, or local, European, and global market. And copper is like other metals, a metal that is extremely, which is easy to recycle and which has a high value. So the market failure to collect and recover copper is not there. I mean, it's something that can be recycled and collected and recycled pretty easily. What is important, obviously, is to make sure that the framework conditions and the market for copper recycling is preserved, and that market is not only a European market, it's a global market. The other parameters are obviously, again, when I say the value of the material, when we look at plastics, the value is much lesser, and the ability to recycle plastics is also more difficult. And you here have a lot of differences between whether you are using those, for instance, plastics in packaging products made of monomaterial. Here you can recycle it much easier. That's the case for PET, or whether those plastics are being used in packaging which are more complex for different reasons, and which are where the material itself is going to be used in combination with other materials, which will actually impact the recyclability of that product. Last but not least, I took a mobile phone. We all have mobile phones. And here we have a huge diversity of materials, many metals, more or less 40, but also plastics, glass. And here actually the difficulty is not per se the value of the materials, which is usually high, is the fact that those different materials are used in very tiny quantities. And this is where actually the obligation linked to recyclability, as for packaging, though they are different, are absolutely essential to make sure that when those mobile phones are reaching end of life stage, the different fractions can be easily dismantled and then recovered using different processes. And this is why recently we signed a common declaration with a number of NGOs, simply because all the pleas that we are making for easier access to the batteries or easier dismantleability is equally important, both for repairability and reusability, but also for recycling when you reach the end of life stage. And it's even more burning topic for us, because access to battery is not only important for recycling, it's also important to make sure that we can separate the battery from the rest of the electronic and electrical appliances to prevent battery fires, which are a huge problem for the recycling industry. Zooming in a bit more, the third problem that we have, and this is why implementing and moving towards the implementation of the both the Green Deal agenda and the new Circular Economy Action Plan is increasingly important, because despite the fact that usually in Europe we are better than in other parts of the world when it comes to recycling, the circular material use rate is still very low. The average one in Europe is 12%. And you have, again, big differences between the best performers and the worst performers. But if we take that average, we still see that more or less 90% of the materials that are being used in Europe are mostly linear materials, and a lot of them being imported from non-EU countries. Not all of them, obviously, but many of them. So here, I think this is where recycling has a role to play. And in terms of key areas for improvement, I'll try to focus on, I would say, two major things. First, absolutely essential, level the playing field in waste management and recycling across Europe. That's kind of echoing my first slide. We need to have a better implementation of the existing legislation, because there are too many gaps among member states, which actually also impact the well functioning of the internal market. Point number two, enforce better legislation. I think that the battery regulation, despite certain flaws, is a good model, because we look here at the entire life cycle from design to end of life, and also setting recycled content targets. And we also use the instruments of regulation, which also actually leaves less margin for interpretation and at implementation stage, simply because contrary to a directive, there is no need for implementation measure, or less need for implementation measures. So hopefully the rules will be implemented the same way. Point number two, obviously better enforcement when it comes to chemicals. One study made by ECA shows one of 4 products imported within Europe are non-compliant with REACH. This is only an example. This is both a problem for consumer, but this is also a problem for recycler, because we have obviously to comply with the strict values when it comes to substances of very high concern. But if what we put in the pipe is already not compliant, that will obviously create a huge problem at the end of the pipe. And last but not least, something that is absolutely essential to us is really to basically better factor in positive externalities or negative externalities. When we recycle, we bring a lot of environmental benefits, but those ones are not reflected in prices. This is absolutely essential, basically, to make sure that those positive externalities in terms of CO2 savings, in terms of resource efficiency saving, are better priced. I took here the example, or we could take here the example of recycled content for PET in packaging. That has had a huge positive impact on scaling up capacities for PET recycling, and decorrelating for the first time PET prices from oil prices, which is absolutely essential to stay competitive, especially when oil prices drop, which is not the case today, but which is cyclical, and basically on which we cannot depend, because our cost structure has nothing to do with the cost of extraction and refinement of primary raw materials. And last but not least, have a proper status. If we want to reward quality of raw materials from recycling, we need to have a proper status for them to be able to level the playing field with extracted raw materials. And here we keep pushing as Zurich for end of waste criteria to reward quality and have that status that is missing. If you ask me, and I hope that will be a useful transition for other interventions for my colleagues, Sustainable Products Initiative is overly important. We absolutely need, both within the Sustainable Products Initiative and with the revision of the Packaged Waste Directive, to make sure that we have a very efficient way to measure the reusability, the recyclability of products we place on the market based on technologies that we have today. We need obviously to innovate, to be able to find technologies to recycle things that are more difficult to recycle today, but what we put in the pipe, and especially for products that have a short lifespan, like packaging products, we need to make sure that they are effectively recyclable based on assessment protocols, which are not based on laboratory testing, but on real testing, because in a lab you can recycle everything. So that's absolutely essential. Also try to make sure that we keep putting recycled content targets for a more broader range of end products and materials, not solely plastics. And last but not least, empower consumer sustainable choices. It has been done for energy, in terms of for energy-related products based on energy. We need to have the same type of way for consumers to be able to make sustainable choices based on the resource efficiency credential of the products that they are going to buy. I stop here. I hope it was not too long, and happy to take any further questions.
Thanks a lot, Emmanuel, for this extensive presentation. So far, there are no specific questions, but usually it takes a bit of time for the audience to warm up. And we're almost at the end of your time for the presentation. So I think we're going to go straight to the next presentation. But if you have, if some questions come to your mind during the second presentation, specifically for Emmanuel, please put them in the chat. We're keeping them all until the end. So yeah, do not hesitate, do not be shy and ask questions. With this, I will introduce the second speaker, Lauren Veer, who is an ocean campaigner for the Environmental Investigation Agency, the EIA, and she has a specific focus on plastic policy within the UK and the EU. She holds, she's graduated in Paleobiology from the University College London, and a Master in Environmental Policy and Regulation from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And she joined the EIA last year, having previously worked on climate change and marine conservation research and advocacy. And with this, Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and also for the invitation to present. So I am an ocean campaigner at the EIA, as Pierre mentioned. We are an NGO that investigates and campaigns against environmental crime and abuse. And as mentioned, I have a specific focus on plastic policy in the European region. I will be presenting on the recycling issues when it comes to end of life of a material. Specifically, I'll be speaking about Europe's trade in plastic waste and how this hinders Europe's objective to achieve circularity. Next slide, please, Thérèse. Thank you. So the global plastic waste trade is something that has been happening for decades. Records began in 1988, reliable data in 1992, and over the last 3 decades, more than 250 million tons of plastic waste has been recorded as exported. Enormous and ever-increasing quantities of plastic waste has overwhelmed domestic waste management infrastructure. And in the face of this crisis, a key tactic for many high-income countries like European member states with high plastic consumption has been to export this plastic waste overseas for recovery treatment. Since the 1990s, this trade has relied heavily on a single importer, that being China, who received up to 72% of the world's plastic waste during this 30-year time period. However, in 2018, China banned the importation of most plastics. This is known as the National Sword Policy on the grounds of the environmental harm it was causing, displacing an estimated, I think it was 111 million tons of plastic waste by 2030. So major exporting countries have been scrambling for new destinations. And now new major destination countries include Malaysia, Turkey, Vietnam, and Indonesia, who, like the European Union, lack waste infrastructure capacity to handle waste and suffers with high mismanagement rates as a result of that. Next slide, please. Oh, I think we're in presenter's view. Yes, I'll continue regardless. I hope that's okay with everyone. So there is a clear correlation between virgin plastic production and exports. High-income countries take advantage of the fact that the repercussions of their plastic waste are felt elsewhere, allowing for continued unchecked consumption. So the environmental, economic, and social and health impacts like environmental degradation or displacement of domestic recycling efforts and exposure to toxic chemicals only further exacerbates global socioeconomic inequality and provides a loophole for circularity. Next slide, please. So what role does the European Union have to play in this? So since records began, EU member states have been within the top 10 exporting countries, with 6 of the top 10 exporting countries in 2020 being EU member states. In 2017, the EU exported 2.55 million tons of plastic waste outside of its territory, with approximately 70% or 75% of this being plastic packaging. Since China's national sword policy, this total amount has been decreasing on an annual basis, but is still significant, as can be seen in the third graphic. And a mixture of destination countries putting in place bans and restrictions to protect themselves, and the EU's decision to halt mixed plastic waste exports to non-OECD countries, which are more difficult to recycle, hence more vulnerable to mismanagement, we have seen the EU rely more heavily on OECD destination countries like Turkey over the course of the last 3 years. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know if we could make the slides potentially a bit bigger and jump out of presentation mode. I can continue talking and we'll catch up. So,
yes.
Slide 5, please, Therese. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yes. Can you put in full screen mode? That should be.
We can also share the slides after the webinar.
Yeah,
with everyone.
All the slides will be shared afterwards in any case, but
okay. I'll just continue chatting.
Yeah.
So what's the current state of play? The EU's waste shipments are managed by the European Waste Shipment Regulation, which is currently in the process of being reviewed. I'll touch on that more later. And the Commission published their initial proposal in November of last year. And what we've seen is that plastic waste trade exports to non-OECD countries initially declined at the beginning of last year because of new Basel plastic amendment restrictions, but they've steadily been increasing again, increasing plastic waste exports to Turkey after Turkey's ban was relaxed in the summer of 2021, and exports to non-OECD countries also increasing, currently standing at 41 million kilograms a month in October 2020, primarily going to Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Next slide, please. So when it comes to issues stemming from the plastic waste trade, we also need to consider the impact of the illicit waste trafficking market. The global waste trade, including plastic waste, is incredibly complex and opaque, with a high number of cross-border actors that, for reasons of commercial sensitivity and confidentiality, renders the trade really difficult to track and map in real time. And this is an incredibly oversimplified graphic explaining all of this. Next slide, please. The lack of transparency as a consequence of a lack of harmonized global electronic notification system, the lack of publicly available real-time data, the lack of inspection capacity, documentation on treatment processes, in addition to smuggling methods like misdeclaration, concealment, transshipment, criminal convergence, whereby waste criminals use legal channels to ship waste, which will then likely be mismanaged, in addition to a lack of operational legislative frameworks that have the desired outcome. For instance, in their evaluation of the existing waste shipment regulation, the Commission recognized that varying levels of enforcement and interpretations have hampered its optimal implementation. That a major shortcoming is the insufficient supervision of the conditions under which non-hazardous wastes, like certain plastics, are managed in destination countries, and that illegal shipments of waste remain a considerable problem due to the general nature of the waste shipment regulation provisions. And what this results in is a rampant and ever-growing illicit waste trade market The European Commission estimates that total annual revenue derived from this illicit market in the EU alone ranges between 4 to 15 billion euro, with that forecast to continue increasing and plastic waste playing a very big role in that. I think we've got presenter mode. Wonderful. Thanks. Next slide, please. Next slide. Wonderful. Thank you. So the primary solution is reduction of overconsumption, leading to such high levels of waste. Countries producing this waste can't manage it. The plastic waste emergency goes beyond sheer volume. It contributes to all three planetary emergencies and is a harmful material that can impact the environment and as well as animal and human health. So what we require is a comprehensive package of upstream solutions across the entire value chain, something that Emmanuel touched upon in his presentation. However, the waste shipment regulation is a very vital part of that package. Next slide, please. I'm cognizant that I'm running quite late, so I'm going to try and speed up. So just very quickly, the Basel Convention is the international agreement that manages waste shipments on the global scale. And it's important to refer to this because in 2019, acknowledging the plastic waste emergency, the convention adopted a series of decisions that are to be transposed by parties, one in particular being the notification procedure of prior informed consent for amber listed waste. And so in a very brief nutshell, if plastic waste is not sorted, almost free from contamination and destined for recycling, the consent of the destination country is required prior to shipment to ensure increased transparency and accountability. And the EU, being party to Basel, is obliged to transpose this. Next slide, please. So taking all of the above into account, the issue of plastic waste trade, the growing illicit waste trafficking market, the current international policy landscape, including the Basel Convention plastic waste amendments, the increasing number of bans and restrictions from destination countries, Europe's aims to have a circular economy as outlined in the new Circular Economy Action Plan and Green New Deal. How do we fix this broken recycling system, and what do we need to see in the revised waste shipment regulation? So we have a number of recommendations, but our top 5 include banning plastic waste exports outside of the European Union. The EU needs to take full responsibility for the treatment of its waste. At a minimum, to fully implement the Basel Convention within the EU with the aim of ensuring prior informed consent notifications for all waste. The EU doesn't currently require prior informed consent for intra-European plastic waste shipments, hampering transparency and accountability. We need to establish a clear distinction between mechanical recycling and other kind of recovery for treatment operations within the file. Following the waste hierarchy is key if we are to reduce our level of plastic consumption, and this needs to be reflected. We need to set a European-wide threshold of plastic waste contamination of 0.5%. Essentially, the higher the level of contamination, the harder it is to recycle the waste, the less economic sense it makes to recycle this waste, thus rendering it more vulnerable to mismanagement. Current EU guidelines are set at 2% for extra EU shipments and 6% for intra-EU shipments, but we don't think that's enough. And finally, to ensure publicly accessible access to waste trade data. Until we can fully hold all stakeholders, operators, and waste flows to account, the system will be taken advantage of. Next slide, please. As with any issue, we need to be mindful of loopholes when it comes to European plastic waste and the adoption of adequate measures. I'm going to go through this very quickly. Retention of European plastic waste should not lead to increased landfill and incineration of material. Zero Waste Europe recently published a study debunking this. The link should be shared in the chat with you, as well as other loopholes like widespread adoption of chemical recycling, the wide uptake of plastic alternatives, including biodegradable alternatives, and that the reduction of plastic material should not result in material substitution. We need to address our single-use throwaway culture, bringing us back to the point where substantive reduction and mass scaling of reusables is needed. So in conclusion, to briefly answer the questions that were put forward in the webinar, What can policymakers do? Well, they could provide an operational and adequate waste shipment regulation review that will put an end to harmful loopholes. They need to prioritize phasing out hard to recycle plastics, and they need to have the political appetite to be cognizant of not in my backyard syndrome. What future role does recycling play? Recycling forms a really essential part of a circular economy. However, priority should be given to the strict implementation of the waste hierarchy, and a transparent and accountable intra-European waste trading system needs to take place. And what are the role of local authorities? Like Emmanuel said, they need to advocate for and implement harmonized, affordable, and consistent recycling systems, and also to be aware of the positives. When it comes to plastic waste, retention of waste for treatment could lead to job creation. As per the Commission's impact assessment, we're set to gain economically when it comes to plastic waste retention. Reusable systems will also create jobs, and the true costs of this practice that are yet to be fully accounted for, whether they be environmental, social, or human health related, will be minimized, which over the long term is significantly more important than any argument being put forward for the continuation of waste shipments. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Lauren, for again this really comprehensive presentation. I'm once again going to be the bad guy and skip the Q&A session, because I really want us to have a fair Q&A session at the end. And there has been a few questions during your presentation, but also linked to Emmanuel's presentation. So I will keep them for the end of the joint Q&A session, and we'll directly go to Arthur for the third presentation. And so Arthur ten Volde is the executive director of Ecopreneur, and Ecopreneur is the European Sustainable Business Federation. It represents about 3,000 businesses in 7 member states, mostly SMEs, and trying to deliver sustainable product and services. Arthur is recognized as a circular economy expert, motivational speaker, and has co-authored several reports on circular economy. He's a member of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform Coordination Group, that can often is issuing reports or recommendations regarding circular economy. And he previously worked for various employers, including the Dutch Industry Confederation. And he has a PhD in experimental physics and is a certified polymer technologist. And with this, I will leave the floor to you, Arthur.
Thank you, Pierre, and thanks for the kind opportunity to speak about the opinions of Ecopreneur, the European Sustainable Business Federation. In case you didn't hear from it, by the way, do you see my screen? Do you see it full screen? Okay. Good. This is an attempt to show who we are. So Ecopreneur is a federation. We have only 7 members, and those members are sustainable business networks in 7 member states, and that is Germany, France, Austria, the Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, and since recently also Estonia. And all these networks consist of sustainable companies, about 3,000 of them, and 79% of them are SMEs. And most of them are well-established enterprises, but also quite a lot of startups. And just 3 typical examples of such sustainable Ecopreneurs: Mud Jeans in the Netherlands, producing sustainable jeans; Repro Cover in Belgium, producing products from recycled plastics; and then Le Bon Pain, by accident, I choose different ones every time, also in Belgium, selling sustainable bread. And all these companies are really dedicated to sustainability. Some started recently, are rapid followers. Others have been working on it for like 20 years. And Ecopreneur is the political voice for sustainable businesses in Europe. So we do mostly advocacy, advising the European Union and also member states about policies. We also do 2 projects, one on life cycle assessment and one on fashion, on circular fashion. So moving on, we produced a report in September 2021 showing this graph where we try to depict that SMEs are very different. There are like 19 million SMEs in Europe, and only 3% of them are really front runners considering sustainability as part of their strategy. And then about 21% are fast followers, and the rest is just reacting. And this is further explained in the report. No time to go into that now. But I would like to show you this. This is our view on the transition to a new sustainable economy, where we are now in this gray area, and what we advocate is that the policies of governments in the EU are changed in such a way that it enables the growth of ecopreneurs and pioneers and the turnaround of conventional SMEs and multinationals. Many policies are needed, but certainly is needed economic incentives like a low VAT for circular and sustainable, accumulated extended producer responsibility, and a tax shift from labor to resources. And we think that these, and Emmanuel will agree with that, Emmanuel Katrakis, these topics are still not discussed enough. But now more to the topic of today. If you look at the Ecopreneur positions, the main ones are the following. First one, ambitious implementation of European Green Deal and all the policies behind it, like the Circular Economy Action Plan, climate policy, the SME strategy. Remember, we represent SME businesses mostly, and also the textile strategy. Also strengthening the roles of SMEs, because they are responsible for 60% of the pollution, and that's globally true, and also in Europe. But they also are better in setting solutions in the market than multinationals. So it's two-sided, and they're like underestimated in this respect and not really helped to do this. Then strong economic incentives like circular procurement, like I said, extended producer responsibility, carbon pricing, very important this week, carbon border adjustment mechanism, tax shift, etc. Also a good taxonomy for financial investments, and also very important, the Sustainable Products Initiative with minimum requirements. But I want to stress that this is only about regulation, and we need also these incentives to make it happen. And then on waste management, and this is already my last slide. I think I can slow down a bit in my how rapid I go through the slides. So on waste management, one of the things that we are in favor of is an EU-wide landfilling ban for non-pre-treated municipal waste by 2030. And we have called for this also with the support of our largest member, the company Remondis from Germany, because this is an opportunity, in our view, to reduce methane emissions, waste, and CO2 emissions much sooner than is planned now. That's the first one. Now, if you do that, so if you stop with landfilling, of course, we should also prevent lock-in in additional incineration capacity. Everything you will not landfill, you should not burn either, unless it's really impossible to do anything else with it at the moment. And that's why also yesterday in a stakeholder meeting with MEP Peter Liese, I have argued that incineration should be included in the EU emission trading system by next year, and not by 2028 as he is proposing. And that way you create a fee structure for waste treatment that is in line with the EU waste hierarchy. There are other ways to do this, by the way, but you create a price incentives by giving CO2 a true price. By the way, true pricing is one of the main advocacy items of Ecopreneur. Give everything the true price, including the external effects. Then important, I saw one question about this. Shouldn't we decrease the waste? And yes, a circular economy, if you want to explain it briefly, it's an economy without waste. So we should not just manage the waste, we should really decrease the waste volumes by circular economy models. And this is also why we are lobbying and also hoping to do a project next year or so to found circularity hubs to teach companies, SMEs and multinationals how to do that, because it can be done, but it's not really easy. You can learn that. For waste treatment, improve the separation methods. And by the way, I'm not just talking about plastics. We have talked a lot about plastics, but we are now also doing a project, like I said, on fashion and textiles. Same thing, and also virtually all other industries. Chemical recycling technologies, they're like overhyped in our opinion. They can become very important, but we have advised the EU to only stimulate and support chemical recycling technology development under 6 strict conditions, including that they will be net carbon saving. Otherwise, you have something that is circular, but it's very unsustainable. Also, for the future of waste treatment, we would like to see the development to process waste using renewable energy. That will, of course, make a lot of difference. And as a result of all this, to slowly phase out waste incineration with energy recovery as a last option towards a future where this is no longer needed, because very few waste is produced, and all the waste that has been generated can be processed in other ways. Well, with that, I would like to conclude. So please, if there are any questions, I would like to hear them. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Arthur, for the presentation. There are a few questions. There's a question in the chat regarding your position on chemical recycling and the fact that it should be carbon saving. The question is in relation to what exactly should it be carbon saving?
The carbon savings should be a net impact. So it can be, if you compare it to the production, to virgin production, that should be the net effect. So that's one of the 6 conditions for change, for the 6 conditions for chemical recycling. I'm now looking up the other 5. I cannot find them immediately, but I can put them in the chat. Would that be okay?
Yes, if you can share the link to paper or report, that would be
yes. Yeah, will do.
That would be amazing, I guess. There is a specific question related to waste prevention. So I'm not sure I get a question right, but it's about implementation of a systematic waste prevention, and why it's not applied by the industry on how it should be, or how it should be applied by businesses and industries. What would be your opinion on this?
So the systemic part, in our view, is mostly a responsibility of governments and of the EU. The way that our companies experience is that they are they're doing an uphill battle to become completely sustainable in an economy which is completely linear and unsustainable. So if you want to make an easy profit, you should become very unsustainable. And it's really easy to make a profit because the whole system is guiding you in that direction. And the level playing field is like this, and this is the uphill battle. And we want to make it like this, so that it should become very easy to make a profit out of being sustainable. That should be in the economic system. So the whole system should be changed specifically by true pricing, meaning that, for instance, organic food should become the cheapest because it's the healthiest, it has the lowest impact on the environment. And instead, it's the most expensive. This is ridiculous. This should be changed for all products and services.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, I see, Emmanuel, as it is really related to what you're doing. You have your hand raised, so.
Yeah, but I don't know whether Joan-Marc wanted to take the floor before, but I wanted to react on that, so I can do it now or later.
If it's really related directly to the point, then I think you can, and then we'll move to Jean-Marc's presentation.
I think regardless of the type of companies we work for, one of the systemic issue is the fact is how we price externalities to make that transition happen. Because if you want to be extremely sustainable, and at the end of the day, you are the one paying the highest price, you are simply not competitive. And I like what Arthur said. I always take my example with my Fairphone. All the staff here is, we don't try to promote Fairphone, but I think it's a very good example of a company who understood how basically a product which is used by everyone across the globe, or most of the people, or most of the middle class, or all the middle class, must actually, we must look at it from a life cycle approach. So first, how we are going to design it, how it's going to be used, how it can be repaired. I can, once my, unfortunately, I had a problem, I called them and they sent me the spare part and I could repair it myself. And then when it goes to end of life, it's even easier to recycle. So the objective is not for everyone across the globe to buy those phones, but for all basically the electronic producers to factor in their business model those sustainability criteria, so as to basically, and one thing when it comes to e-waste is everything related to eco-modulation of fees, because here you do have indeed, as for packaging, EPR schemes. And one of the problems that we have today is that those fees are mostly basically based on volumes or on volumes or on units. They are not sufficiently taking on board, obviously, the sustainability impact of the product that is placed on the market. And this is where actually it requires to work with everyone, including producers of those products, so that we can basically, through modulation of fees, try to make sure that what they place on the market is easier to repair, easier to recycle, and use recycled content. And I also wanted, and I'm going to be very short, we are representing plastic recyclers, technical plastic recyclers. We don't have much buyers for those technical plastics in Europe because most of the industry has moved to non-European countries. So, we can discuss the threshold, but we produce flakes, we produce pellets, high-value materials, which are not going to end up in the ocean, but the buyers are not in Europe. So the problem is not only European, it's a global one.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Emmanuel. And with this, we're going to move to our next and last speaker, Jean-Marc Simon, who is the Executive Director at Zero Waste Europe. As you know, it's a Brussels-based NGO, which has been active for 10 years now in Brussels. Jean-Marc is also member of the steering committee of Breakthrough from Plastic, a global movement that is now gathering nearly 1,500 organizations worldwide and working towards a future free from plastic pollution. And he has recently authored the book Zero Waste, How to Reactivate the Economy Without Crashing the Planet. And this is linked to his more than a decade experience in leading the field on zero waste, both in Europe and globally. So with this, Jean-Marc, you can go.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierre and Teresa and Jack and all the colleagues at Zero Waste Europe for putting together this very interesting webinar. I'm so happy we're having these conversations. I think they are crucial. And I'm happy also I don't have a presentation to share with you, because speaking the last, you would see that lots of stuff might be repeated. So I'll try to tackle stuff that has not been raised in this conversation, again, focusing on recycling. Zero Waste Europe, we work a lot on reuse, on prevention, on toxicity, on disposal, but today we're talking about recycling. And I would like to start again, when it comes to recycling in Europe, when we look at circularity, recycling plays a key role. Today, as it has been said, Europe is around 12% circular. And we need to bear in mind that actually of the stuff that comes into Europe in terms of raw materials, like 1/3 is lost in emissions, 1/3 is lost kind of dispersed in the environment from phosphorus and other nutrients, and 1/3 is actually this waste, the construction waste, the municipal waste, etc. And of this 1/3, less than like 20% is recycled or introduced in the economy. That's how we end up with this 12%. And the truth today is that if, beyond what the legislation says, and that's the reason why we chose this provocative title, the broken recycling system in Europe, is because today in Europe we have lots of waste that is not recycled and probably will never be. We don't know. As of today, recycling of textiles is almost non-existent. Cement, concrete, these are all materials that are not reusable. Will they be recycled at scale with the like proper recycling that is not downcycling? We're not there yet. Then there's some stuff that is recycled, but not a lot. Like if we look at bio-waste, which is something we have not discussed today, but between 1/3 and 40% of the municipal waste that we generate in Europe is bio-waste. And as of today, around 16% of the potential bio-waste that we could be recycling in Europe is recycled, which means that, again, it's more than 80% of bio-waste that is lost, that's ending up in landfills and incinerators. But then again, when you look at recycling rates for plastic today, they are around 17%. And for some polymers, such as PET, which is the jewel of the crown, you will get higher rates. But for the majority, for non-packaging plastic household products, the recycling rate is 1%. For electronics, it's also very low. For batteries, which is, I agree with Eric, is a success story, but we're still at 50% separate collection of batteries. And most of them are still not being reintroduced. And then there's some success stories of recycling, like metals or glass, but still we are recycling stuff that probably should not be recycled, should be reused, and it should stay with us for a lot longer. So it's a challenging situation. So in interest of time and not to repeat, what I think are the ways to address this? Recycling is a systemic issue. And as it has been presented, we need to deal with it from the design to the disposal stage. We're facing the challenging composition of products that are not designed to be recycled. Actually, the evolution of EPR systems that have focused on reducing the weight of packaging and other materials. What it has led to is that products are more complex and more difficult to recycle. Still today, the collection and recycling is too expensive in comparison with disposal in many European countries, and like that is difficult to compete. We have the extended producer responsibility schemes, which for me it's a half a story of a success, because they have been successful at providing cost coverage for the collection and the treatment of packaging and other waste streams, but they have not been successful in getting enough quantity and enough quality of materials. We're also lacking the pull from the market. The secondary raw material for recyclables is not there yet. And then, as it has been said as well, from transparency and traceability perspective, we don't know the level of contamination of products that we import into Europe. Contamination, to say it, we don't know what is in the products, but also we have huge data gaps when we deal with waste. I mean, we know, for example, for plastic that more than 1/3 of the plastic that is put in the market doesn't appear later as waste. So where do these millions of tons of plastic end up? It's something I think that we need to find out if we want to start addressing the plastic issue. So what is required to fix or to address this problem? First of all, I think design for recycling is key. And as already proposed here, the Sustainable Product Initiative, I hope is going to dwell into this. But I think it makes sense that everything that is placed in the market should be recyclable. For me, it's common sense. It's surprising that still today, most of what is put in the market is not recyclable. Also today, we have learned that there's an investment from the EU to spend 43 billion euros in research and production of semiconductors, which are key for the world economy. But we also need a strategy to actually and keep these resources in Europe. Something that hasn't been raised, and I think is very important, is that we need to rethink definition of recycling. It's not the same to recycle a PET bottle into a PET bottle and PET bottle into polyester for clothes. The reason being because these clothes cannot be a bottle again. And I think today in the waste hierarchy, we have prevention, we have preparation for reuse, we have recycling, recovery and disposal. I think we need to look into actually having different definitions for what I would call high value recycling and low value recycling. I'm not talking about quality because I think that downcycling or low value recycling is still important for the stuff that is degraded or that actually anything that we can avoid from ending up in landfills and incinerators is good to have that, but it's not the same. So I think we need incentives for high value recycling, which is again, is not the same as closed loop recycling. So I think there's work to be done when we start actually dealing with recycling seriously. It is not the same high value recycling, closed loop recycling, or low value recycling, and semantics are important in this. Then recyclability is a key thing. Today, the European Union is addressing recyclability in a very scattered and confusing way. Like we have the Circular Plastic Alliance that is looking into recyclability definition for plastic packaging. Then hopefully the Commission is looking into recyclability for packaging. I believe that Europe needs to have a comprehensive approach to recyclability that is across the board, and then break it by categories, but don't start by atomizing the definitions of recyclability, or it's going to be complicated. And recyclability needs to be tested against what is happening in the real world, because something that is recyclable in Spain might not be recyclable in Italy, and vice versa. So it needs to be aligned with the capacities of collection and treatment locally. Then we need targets for recycled content, and it's great to see how the recycled content targets of the Single-Use Plastic Directive are driving change in that market. But I think we need it for other categories and other materials, because that actually creates the pull from the market to create a secondary raw material. Another key thing that I think is not being mentioned is that separate collection is key, but it's not enough. For example, it's great that we have an obligation to source separate bio-waste by the end of 2023, but that doesn't mean that you just put a container to collect bio-waste in the street and it's done. Because if we don't manage to capture enough organics into that container, then this is not enough. The same is true for textiles. We have an obligation to separately collect textiles, but how much are we going to capture? The same for batteries, etc. Separate collection is important, is key, but we need high levels of separate collection. Also because it's been proven that when you get to 90% separate collection, which is possible with deposit and refund systems or with door-to-door separate collection, what happens when you get to 90% separate collection is that the quality of the recyclate increases exponentially. And the only way to get there is really to have targets in captures and high separate collection targets. And concluding this, when it comes to extended producer responsibility that we're seeing that is expanding to other categories, I think we need to go beyond cost coverage, and actually the eco-modulation and bringing in recyclability and other considerations to award the fees is key, but also we need to look into connecting EPR with prevention and with reuse. Transparency and traceability are key for the reasons that I said before. And of course, from a consumer perspective, it's important that consumers play along. But today, as a consumer, it's impossible to know what is recyclable and what is not. We are being asked as consumers to put stuff that is not recyclable into the container with recyclables just because it's paid by an EPR system, whereas stuff that is perfectly recyclable doesn't have a bin to go to. So I think that we need to make sure that consumers are clearly informed with a clear label that informs about the recyclability, reusability, and toxicity of the items that we buy. And I hope the Sustainable Product Initiative is going to shed some light on this topic. And last but not least, of course, when it comes to disposal, I think Europe doesn't need more disposal capacity if we manage to really redirect the flows of what today is not recyclable. Let's make it recyclable, make sure it's recycled. And of course, the current 10% landfill target is detrimental to the EU recycling targets, and instead we should have abandoned landfilling of untreated waste, plus compulsory sorting of residual waste, and basically like push as much as recyclables as possible out of disposal facilities. All in all, I think we will agree that recycling is not enough, but it's really necessary. And there is no silver bullet. As I have explained, I think we need to take lots of actions that really tackle all the levels of the supply chain from design to disposal if we want to address this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jean-Marc, for the presentation. We have a first question for you that is specifically on Zero Waste Europe's view on chemical recycling. And if you could, what is the position of Zero Waste Europe, and if you could explain it to the audience today.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, it cut off a moment.
The position on chemical recycling.
All right. Yeah.
Good one.
I love this question because everybody talks about chemical recycling when it's actually so much important stuff to talk about. But still, I think chemical recycling, it's not a silver bullet to plastic. At Zero Waste Europe, we believe that there's a role for chemical recycling to play when we're talking about contaminated or degraded polymers. That if we can avoid burning or landfilling them, and again being carbon neutrality applying, that could have a role. What is important though is that we assess the economic and the environmental feasibility of these technologies. So we are studying today these technologies, and for the moment we are seeing that most of them are not either environmental and economically viable. So we need to study them and see them coming, but yeah, we're looking into this again in comparison with prevention, with reuse, and with mechanical recycling. I think the expectations on chemical recycling are a bit different.
Okay, thanks a lot. All clear. Then related to what you said about prevention, and related to a bit different comments and question that were in the chat, I will ask you the question, and then that will be open to all speakers. But one thing that we saw is the bridge, or how the transition to a functioning recycling system can help bridging towards waste prevention. Because I think questions in the chat are about how we might maybe lock ourselves in recycling. If we call waste a resource, then we're not inclined to reduce it. And so what is your view on how an efficient recycling system can lead to more waste prevention, or can create a path toward waste prevention? That will be for you, and then other speakers, you can feel free to jump in afterwards.
I think that we need to understand that this is a systemic issue when it comes to dealing with materials and with products. And of course, waste prevention is key and should have absolute priority, but I would not address waste prevention from the point of view of waste. I think it needs to be addressed from the point of view of product design and use. If we design systems so that nothing becomes waste, I think that's a lot more effective. So for example, all the initiatives of the pay-per use, or actually ensure that there's closed loops between the producer and the consumer, I think that is the way forward. So if we clear up the wall and the mess around recycling, prevention is going to be easier. But that's for me only one part of the equation.
Okay, thanks. Emmanuel?
It's a very, very, very broad question. So
yes,
again, for me, it's the same. We want to move towards a circular economy, and one thing that is essential is the fact that we need to connect dots, which usually don't speak together. The recycling is an industry, so if you know, we often organize site visits so that also people can see that what comes in is a very complex waste. So you have different types of materials. You know, we are like a mining company, but we do things the other way around. While the mining company is going to produce only one material or two materials, we're going to take a waste with usually many different materials, and we will try to do our best to extract those materials and put them back into the economy. The difficulty is that what we process at the end of life has barely been designed to be recycled when it reaches end of life. And so it's very difficult to answer that question, because between bio-waste, if you compare bio-waste to concrete, you know, construction demolition waste, to the type of waste you process when you have e-waste, the market failures, the design issue that we're going to face, they have very little thing to have together. Well, I fully agree with Joan Marc, is that maybe Michael Rada wants to speak, so looking also at the different, is the fact that we need to have a very holistic approach to product design for recyclability, recycled content, but also reusability following the waste hierarchy. And then we have to have a real approach on product categories, because we do have a textile branch. And as Joan also said, most of the textiles that our companies collect is being sorted for reuse. The textiles today which cannot be reused, we don't have, or we are working on technologies which can mechanical recycling, but also some technologies using chemical recycling to be able to sort and recover different types of fibers. I'm not going to start entering into the debate on chemical recycling, because I think we are pretty much aligned on a number of things, on making sure that we make a separation between mechanical on one hand and chemical that usually comes with a higher energy consumption, but also acknowledge that this word is a basket for very different types of technologies, which usually are more difficult or more difficult to compare. For me, if you ask me, what is absolutely essential is to make sure that when you use a technology that we label as recycling, the output is material recovery, that we are not going to label it as when we produce something that can be used as a fuel as recycling. This is another category. So I don't know whether I'm answering, because the question is extremely wide, but I would say for sure we need to keep working on the fundamentals, which is efficient collection system, level the playing field, but pricing externalities to be able basically to make investments and be more innovative. And at the same time, having a holistic approach while and work on product categories is absolutely essential. So I stop here because I see other people in the chat willing to have the floor. So I don't know, it's for you, Pierre, to see how you want to manage that.
Yes, indeed, it's not usually something we do, and we're actually checking if we can give the floor to participants, because that's not the way we do it for this webinar. But in the meantime, we're checking this, Arthur, and then Lauren, you can take the floor on this.
Okay, can I say something? Thank you.
Sure. Please.
Yes, what I would like to say is about the circular design. That is really a key thing. And even now, I mean, all 3,000 companies in our membership, in the membership of Ecopreneur, are not waiting for governments to come with a circular and sustainable economy legislation. No, they're doing it already. And I was thinking about a program in the Netherlands supported by the Dutch government. And I'm also, a few times a year, I'm giving trainings via that program to individual SMEs and also some multinationals. And for instance, last fall, we had a training course on textiles. And there was a company doing compression stockings. There was a company doing women's bras. There was a company doing rugs. And then in the training, they line out their linear value chain. So the current value chain, which is a value chain, it's not circular. And then they start to point out to themselves where is value lost, and it's also where there are environmental where's pollution taking place. Things are leaking out of the system, but also the value. And then on the second day, they close the linear value chain into a circle, and they try to preserve the value. And on the third day, they have a pitch, and they have a new value proposition that can still make a profit in the linear economy, but it's circular. And that is the way that companies can already now today start working on sustainable and circular solutions, even in the absence of a circular economy.
Yes, thanks a lot. Lauren, you want to react?
Yes, it was just to briefly add to what everyone had said. So when it comes to the recycling system, bridging waste prevention and ensuring efficiency, I agree entirely with everything that's been said. Eco design is paramount. Circularity is key. Accountability is incredibly important. But at the end of the day, we also need to address the loopholes that are currently taking place. And with regards to plastic waste, that loophole is the export of waste to other territories outside of the European Union. There is ample evidence that the legal channels that allow for waste shipments are being co-opted by waste criminals. The lack of transparency overwhelmed waste management systems as a result of our waste going to countries that are producing waste for their own are all things that need to be addressed. And that by operating within a transparent and finite recycling system, we will hamper and reduce that leakage. And it's not something that's simply an issue for plastic waste. We also see this with textiles, for instance, and the dumping of a huge amount of textiles in Chile. So it was just to add that little sweetener on the end.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Emmanuel, I see.
I also want to say that transitioning towards a circular economy is a project for society. It's also an industrial project, and which is absolutely essential. As I say, I work for an industry, and we need to make sure that value chains are going to use more and more materials which are circular, which are recycled, but which also think about, as I said, from design stage, how we can put products which are more durable, more recyclable, so far and so on. And again, taking the example of recycled content, since now that we have recycled content for PET in bottles, what we saw is that often brands are already labeling the fact that they want to already today exceed the targets that have been put at European level. And that has also contributed to put a value which decrease the likelihood of those products, of those plastic products to be exported, because they have to be collected and they have to be used back to make products and put them back into the economy. So what I want to say is that obviously we need to work at the collection stage, at making sure that we don't have illegal shipments. We also need to make absolutely certain that we are going to pull the demand for circular materials and circular products on the other hand of the pipe. Otherwise, we are not able as an industry to strive to grow and make sure that what is reaching end of life is going to be not only properly recycled, but also used when it has been recycled. And again, I can only invite, we are extremely happy to try to show recycling sites how they work. One of the biggest difficulty when they have to make investments into new technologies is to know whether there will be a buyer at the end of the pipe to basically be in a position to amortize the investment that are being done. And again, that's why I get it back to my earlier slide. You have a number of materials which are highly recyclable. They have been recycled. A lot of technology has been put in them. You also have a lot of other products which are far more difficult to recycle, for which eco-design has a role to play, but also pulling the demand for those materials when they reach end of life to make sure that we can invest and find the right solution.
Thanks, Emmanuel. I see Arthur wants to react. I'm just checking in. We cannot open the floor to participants. If you want to say something, I invite you to really be clear in the messages or in the Q&A box so that really speakers can react. But unfortunately, we cannot open the floor to viewers. But yeah, so Arthur, now if you want to.
Thank you, Pierre.
React.
Yes,
Yep.
About the recyclability and the recycled content, about 2 years ago, I was a lot in Brussels lobbying for recycled content, because it was obvious by then that the new waste framework directive was going to move from what it was before, just it has to be burnable. Every product on the EU market, it should be possible to burn it. Well, hooray. But now in the future, it needs to be possible to make it reusable or recyclable. But there was a lot of resistance from the conventional industry against the idea of recycled content. They wanted it just to be recyclable. But that says virtually nothing, was our position. Because I was sometimes sitting there with Werner and Merz, one of our members, and they produce their detergent in bottles that are from plastic, but the bottles are already 100% recycled and 100% recyclable. So from recycled content on both ends. It's entirely possible already. They're doing it. I think that the European Commission is moving in this direction, and I think that's a good thing to make it really normal in the future economy that this is the case. And then there was another question about bio or recycled. There were actually more questions about that, and that's very important because intuitively everybody thinks, well, if it's bio, then it's good and it's green, etc. But this is unfortunately not the case. It's not so simple. And in my opinion, you have to look at the level of an individual product and an alternative. So one is bio, one is made from recycled content. And yes, it should be either of those. But sometimes the bio is better, and the other times the recycled one is better.
Yes, could you explain maybe what you mean by a bio product or product made of? Is it related to bio-based products, for instance? Or you're on mute, Arthur.
Yes, I mean bio-based, but then, normally you think of something that is coming from, say, agricultural waste or from plants. I think that's the most easy part. And then what you should take care of is how it was produced. Was it produced from land that was not burned, was not like a forest before that? So the land use is very important. And also, even if something is made from natural materials, of course, then if it's waste, it can come back in nature. So that's wonderful, at least if it's not processed into something else. But even then, you should look at the total life cycle assessment about the emissions and the impact, including, again, the land use. And then look at the alternative, because if you have like plastic, you can also take for clothing, you can use wool or cotton, or you can use synthetic materials, plastics. And sometimes the plastics can have a better impact if you really collect everything afterwards and have 100% recycling. So you keep it all in the techno cycle. That can be better.
Yeah, okay, it makes sense. And that's actually a topic I wanted to go towards, because it has been in the chat and the question. I think you made the bridge with what is called material substitution, and we know, as you said, the bio alternative might not be the good substitution, and we've seen cases where there has been, for example, bioplastic put in the recycling stream for plastic, and that was disrupting the recycling chain. I mean, it's personal experience, but I often see in restaurants now forks or knives made with compostable, but there is no bin for bio-waste collection. So yeah, I want to ask the speakers now about your view on this big question, but on material substitution and maybe the framework for this. And Emmanuel, you had your hand, but I guess Jean-Marc and Lauren, you also have. You can go after, but yeah, Emmanuel, you go first.
You have to be very careful with those claims, because obviously you have a difference between, on one hand, biodegradable plastics and bio-based plastics. Those are two different things. We came up with a long position as a recycling industry. We are not a big fan at all of biodegradable plastics because, first, they have to biodegrade effectively when they are put in the composting bin. And point number two, often there is no proper infrastructure actually to make the collection. So if we go for such biodegradable plastics, we need to first make sure that we have the proper infrastructure and that they biodegrade effectively. Point number two, they can be misleading because if we put them in the bin with plastics, then they can completely screw the recycling process. So that's something that is absolutely essential. When we put on the market, new materials, we need to make sure that they are going to fit well with the existing framework. and that they are not going to cross-contaminate, for instance, the conventional plastic recycling, to take that as an example. Yeah, for the rest, we have a very long paper available on our website, so I will just put it in a link somewhere and share it with Zero Waste Europe, because yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, feel free to share it in the chat. Then Jean-Marc or Lauren? Jean-Marc, you go, and Lauren, if you have something then.
No, I tend to agree with what Emmanuel has said. Material substitution, in a way, is not a solution per se. I think it can be useful in some situations, but again, we need to look at how is that designed for use so that it's durable, repairable, and at the end of the day, it should have the means to be collected and recycled. And what we are seeing with most of the material innovation, unfortunately, is that stuff is put in the market, but that it's not clear in which bins should it be separated, or the producer doesn't actually have a system to get back that material, and therefore ends up either contaminating the technical cycle or the biological cycle. So, of course, we don't want that. When it comes to compostable plastic, again, this is, I would not like to look into the material substitution for that. I think that compostable plastics can play like some concrete roles, like if you use them, for example, to separately collect bio-waste, it makes sense to use compostable plastic bags, because this way it makes the system more efficient, and in the end, it's the biological cycle. If you're going to be replacing, as you say, cutlery or bottles from like non-compostable but with compostable plastic, I think that is going to be a problem for the supply chain and for the treatment. So all in all, I think that we have the materials that we need for most applications that we need in our lives. So I would say let's focus on what we have and make it work. We know that we have thousands of polymers out there, but we also know that we can effectively recycle in an economic way less than 4 of them, which is quite telling. I mean, I would like to see more recycling of more polymers, but the truth is that as of today, the economics of collection and treatment are not there to have really high quality recycling after the issue.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Lauren, do you want to add something? And not to put you on spot, but I know you work on agri-plastic, so I'm also thinking there might be a link.
I was going to mention it. Of course, yeah, I was going to talk about supermarket packaging, but I can most definitely talk about agri-plastics. So when it comes to material substitution, something that we are very cognizant of and something that we're very wary of is that substitution of a single-use material to another single-use material. In the majority of cases, in a lot of the cases, just renders, how to put it, it just creates issues elsewhere, and it doesn't necessarily answer the issues at hand. And actually what we need to be focusing on is reduction. The example that I was going to give is the case of over-packaging in grocery retail packaging. At the beginning of this year, France put in place a ban on plastic packaging for most fruit and vegetables within supermarkets. You have Carrefour and you have Tesco that have launched reusable trials with Loop, who provide household name brands that can form part of a reusable and deposit return system. And then you've got zero waste shops popping up everywhere that are able to showcase that operational and viable solutions can be found in reduction. So material substitution is not always necessarily the answer. When it comes to agri-plastics, it's a little bit different. Obviously, our current agricultural system has really benefited from using plastics, especially mulch, to increase crop yields, retain moisture, reduce the application of fertilizers and pesticides, but also the use of plastic, conventional plastic mulching, has severe consequences on soil quality and microplastic contamination. But at the same time, global demand, climate change impacting weather patterns, these kind of plastics, or the application of these kind of plastics, can be beneficial. And when it comes to mulching in particular, there are biodegradable alternatives out there. But what we need to be very mindful of is that the current criteria outlined in certification systems isn't apt enough. And that isn't to say that biodegradable shouldn't be used, but more research is definitely needed. And the example of that would be Europe's EN 17033 certification scheme for biodegradable mulching. It doesn't acknowledge or take into account all of the climatic variations that are found across Europe. It doesn't necessarily account for biodegradability in marine environments. And we know that dumping and mismanagement can result in mulching becoming going within marine environments. And there was an assessment by the University of Tennessee saying that this certification scheme also allowed theoretically that biodegradability could be measured in powder form, which theoretically is wonderful, but in practice is actually not the case.
Okay, thanks a lot for this explanation. And yeah, on microplastic, and unfortunately that will be the last intervention, as we're already reaching the end of the webinar. But that was a very interesting webinar, really challenging in all the different topics that were addressed. Hence, I would like really to thank the panelists for their contribution and for answering the questions, and as well the viewers and the audience for joining us. Now, just a small reminder that the presentation will be available on the tool section on the Zero Waste Cities website, and you also see many types of reports or guidelines you could find useful for transitioning towards circular economy. I want also to remind you that there will be a webinar next month also on how to finance Zero Waste City, and that will be on the 8th of March, same time as today. And if you want to get informed about our next webinars, you can also sign up to the Zero Waste Cities newsletter. And with that, I would like to thank you again, and I wish you a good afternoon. Bye, everybody.